Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, September 8th, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. News from the Supreme Court today. In a 6-3 decision, it blocked a federal judge's ruling that restricted federal officers' ability to conduct immigration stops in the Los Angeles area. The court also received a formal request from the White House to let it hold back $4 billion of congressionally approved foreign aid. The appeal comes after a federal judge ruled last week that the administration must spend the money. On Capitol Hill, multiple media accounts this afternoon say congressional leaders are trying to de-escalate a standoff over the September 30th government funding deadline, with both Republicans and Democrats saying they'd be open to a short-term bill that wouldn't include substantial funding cuts. Meanwhile, Senate Republican leader John Thune is taking the first steps to change rules on executive nominations. This after Democrats blocked several of the president's picks before August recess. And from the Washington Post, a divided Supreme Court on Monday lifted a ruling by a lower court judge who placed limits on immigration raids in the Los Angeles area after finding federal agents were indiscriminately targeting people based on race and other factors. The justices sided with the Trump administration, which argued that a temporary restraining order issued by a federal judge was hampering its ability to crack down on illegal migration, and that the stops by authorities were not unlawful. The Post goes on to write the majority did not offer a rationale for the decision, which is common in cases decided on the Supreme Court's emergency docket. But Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote in a concurring opinion that illegal immigration is a major issue in the Los Angeles area. He added, quote, "To be clear, apparent ethnicity alone cannot furnish reasonable suspicion under this court's case law regarding immigration stops. However, it can be a relevant factor when considered along with other salient factors." Justices Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson disagreed. Justice Sotomayor wrote, "We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. Rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost, I dissent." That all from the Washington Post's account of the Supreme Court decision. Now we'll hear what Attorney General from California, Rob Bonta, had to say about the decision coming up. But now to the White House request to hold back $4 billion in federal aid. NBC News' Lawrence Hurley reporting today, the case marks a showdown over to what extent the president can refuse to spend money that Congress has appropriated. A brewing issue as the Trump administration has embraced a sweeping view of presidential power since taking office again in January. In the new filing, Solicitor General D. John Sauer described the case as raising a grave and urgent threat to the power of the presidency. Under the Constitution, it is the job of Congress to allocate funds that the president can spend, while the Trump administration has said it wants to withhold the $4 billion. It has said it plans to spend another $6.5 billion that Congress has appropriated. That from NBCNews.com this afternoon. President Trump spoke this morning. He was at a meeting of the White House Religious Liberty Commission. He announced the Education Department would work to protect students' right to pray in public schools.
For most of our country's history, the Bible was found in every classroom in the nation. Yet in many schools today, students are instead indoctrinated with anti-religious propaganda, and some are even punished for their religious beliefs, and very, very strongly punished. It's ridiculous. Joining us this morning is Hannah Allen from Honey Grove, Texas. A few years ago, Hannah organized a group of her classmates to pray for an injured peer. The school principal declared that Hannah's generous act of love was prohibited from taking place in front of the other students. Didn't like it. The principal didn't like it. Can you imagine? But Hannah very strongly stood her ground, and she won. And Hannah, I just want to thank you for letting the light of your faith shine for all of those to see. We really appreciate it. And where is Hannah? Is Hannah here someplace? I think so. Hannah, stand up, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hannah. I know what you went through. I know what you went through. It's great. Appreciate it. To support students like Hannah, I'm pleased to announce this morning that the Department of Education will soon issue new guidance protecting the right to prayer in our public schools, and it's total protection.
The president also talked about his administration's efforts on Christian bias.
and I created the first ever Department of Justice task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. And for those people that are a little bit naive or not well-read, there is a tremendous anti-Christian bias. We don't hear about it. We don't think about it. You hear about anti-Semitic, but you don't hear about anti-Christian. Now, you have a strong anti-Christian bias, but we're ending that rapidly, I will tell you. It's a whole... We're in a much different world today than we were 1 year ago. This is like a different world.
He also emphasized the importance of listening to people of faith.
Because you're the people we want to hear from. We want to hear from you. I don't want to hear from a lot of people. I hear from too many people. You're the people we respect. Franklin is incredible. All of the people that are up here, I want to hear from these people. And they come from a different place than me. I come from a business place where there's a lot of rough people, bad people, not really religious people. There are some. But you're the people that I want to hear from. That's why we go to church on Sundays, or we go to wherever we are to listen to people of faith. And it was horrible. I said, you mean, when I heard that, and I said to the other people, that means that you should be the most powerful people on earth, in a sense, and yet you have less power. And I pointed down to Fifth Avenue, which was 68 stories below, and I said, that means that anybody on Fifth Avenue, in theory, has more power than you do. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the opposite. We have to give your voices back. And I've given you voices back. And that's one of the reasons that we see upticks now, I think, in religion. So it's very important.
NBC News reporting that the president's most recent public visit to a church was on January 20th and 21st, around his inauguration. And as we look ahead for the White House this week, the New York Post reporting this morning that the president will attend the 9/11 memorial event at the Pentagon on Thursday, while Vice President Vance will attend the ceremony at Ground Zero in New York City. The president also plans to be at the New York Yankees-Detroit Tigers baseball game at Yankee Stadium on Thursday night. But that's not the only thing the White House is focused on this week. Here's Washington Examiner White House correspondent Christian Daytok.
Well, I think the big thing that they're looking at right now is how to avoid a government shutdown. Of course, we just got back from recess here in D.C. Lawmakers are up on Capitol Hill, but they have a very short deadline to meet this end of September window. And to be quite frank, I think Democrats might be giving Republicans a little bit of a gift here. Based on what we're hearing behind closed doors, it does seem that Democratic leadership is willing, or at least open to the possibility of a 45-day extension on a bipartisan basis so that both sides can try and hammer out the FY26 budget at length and not rush this thing through. There are a couple of, flies in the ointment. Of course, Thomas Massie might rally a little bit of Republican opposition. And of course, the president's push for this so-called pocket rescission, which is already being challenged in courts. If Democrats object to this, this could, again, endanger a continued funding of the government and potentially plunge us into a shutdown. But I would have to say that other than 9/11, the government shutdown obviously is the #1 focus of the White House right now from a policy standpoint.
On that government funding extension, is the idea for Democrats simply to keep the government functioning? Is that why they're doing it? Or are you hearing something about being able to extract some conditions for being open to allowing that to happen and giving the votes that would be needed for that to happen?
You hear a lot of things. It's hard to know what's real and what's smoke. Obviously, Democrats do want to eke concessions out of this White House. But I do think, like in March, there is a fear that based on Donald Trump's messaging prowess, that the Democrats would be the party to shoulder the blame for a government shutdown. And of course, there are concerns that if the deadline is not met, it would be OMB Director Russ Vought who is determining who in the federal government is essential and essentially cherry picking which institutions, which agencies, which departments could still be coming into work even while the rest of the government would be furloughed. So on the one hand, Democrats do want to see concessions, but ultimately I think they are afraid about what a Trump administration unchecked by Democrats or career bureaucrats within the executive branch, how they might advance the president's agenda in a very short amount of time.
Washington Examiner White House correspondent Christian Daytalk on this morning's Washington Journal. Now, to the ongoing government funding talks. The Hill's Alex Bolton writing today, congressional leaders are trying to de-escalate a standoff over the September 30th government funding deadline, with both Republicans and Democrats signaling they'd be open to a 45-day or possibly longer, clean stopgap that would not include substantial funding cuts. The Democrats are trying to keep a path open to a bipartisan deal by saying privately they are not going to draw a red line against President Trump's $4 billion pocket rescission. Instead, they'll let the courts handle Trump's attempt to sidestep Congress by rescinding funding unilaterally. If the president inserts demands into the negotiations that Democrats can't accept, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries are ready to hold the line, even if it means a shutdown. That from the Hill's Alex Bolton. And we mentioned those procedural changes Senate Republican Leader John Thune is proposing. He talked about it during his leader time remarks.
And so, Mr. President, we've got a crisis, and it's time to take steps to restore Senate precedent and codify in Senate rules what once was understood to be standard practice, and that is the Senate acting expeditiously on presidential nominations to allow a president to get his team into place. And so this afternoon I'll be taking the necessary procedural steps to amend the rules. It is an idea, as I said earlier, with a Democrat pedigree. The senior Democrat senator from Minnesota, along with her colleague in the Democrat caucus, the junior senator from Maine, made a similar proposal in 2023, which would have codified in Senate rules the longtime Senate precedent of en bloc nominations, of moving nominations in groups. Our measure is not as extensive, I should say, as that of my Democrat colleagues. It only applies to nominees at the sub-cabinet level and not to Article III judicial nominees as theirs did. But the proposals share the same objective, and that is providing for confirming groups of nominees all together so the President can have his team in place and so the Senate can focus on the important legislative work in its charge. Or to quote the senior Democrat from Minnesota on her very similar proposal, and I quote again, "This common sense reform will help improve efficiency and make sure we're able to fill positions that are vital to our national security, economic success, and more," end quote. Mr. President, 8 months of petty partisanship is long enough. This Senate has cast more votes up to this point than any Senate going back to the 1980s. We have been in more hours than any Senate going back a couple of decades. This historic obstruction ends now. Democrats have destroyed Senate precedent, and we're going to fix it. Fix it and ensure that in the future, duly elected presidents of both parties are able to get their teams in place without unnecessary delay so that they can fulfill their responsibilities to the American people.
Part of Senate Republican Leader John Thune's leader time remarks. On his leader time, Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer offered his view of the proposed change.
At the end of the last work period, Democrats were working in good faith with Republicans on nomination package to move through this chamber. Senator Thune was very involved. He seemed very willing to come up with an agreement. And then at the last minute, of course, Donald Trump said literally to me, "Go to hell." And the talks fell apart. Was there any integrity? Was there any backbone? Was there any strength to say to Trump, "We have an agreement, take a walk"? No way. And so now, rather than giving those talks another chance, Republicans would rather change how the Senate operates to weaken this chamber's traditional and powerful sense of deliberation. And if Republicans go nuclear, the historically bad nominees we've seen so far under Donald Trump will get only worse. Let me say that again, because this is the crux of the matter. We all know what horrible nominees he puts up. As I said before, like with Mr. Artown, no sense of integrity, no sense of rule of law, just bow down to Trump. Well, the kind of people confirmed by this chamber this year have been unprecedentedly bad, beyond the pale. Scandal after scandal, expose after expose. Many of them are far worse than any group of nominees we've seen before. Trump has made a mockery of the nominations process. He lacks any sense of principle. He doesn't care if the people he picks are unqualified, if they're liars, if they're corrupt. Sometimes it's almost as if the more corrupt, the better, because then Donald Trump will totally control what they do. It's as if he wants the Senate to confirm people willing to lie for him, to even cheat for him. He wants people who are willing to stand up for him without question. Loyalty is the only quality he seeks, and to hell with the rest. And if you don't debate nominees, if you don't vote on individual nominees, if there's not some degree of sunlight, what will stop Donald Trump from nominating even worse individuals than we've seen to date, knowing this chamber will rubber stamp anything he wishes? I say to my Republican colleagues, think carefully before taking this step. If you go nuclear, it's going to be a decision you will come to regret.
Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer. And from Politico, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries has chosen California Representative Eric Swalwell to lead Democrats on a newly formed subcommittee to reinvestigate events surrounding the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. Leader Jeffries has also picked Representatives Jasmine Crockett of Texas and Jared Moskowitz of Florida. At an event on Capitol Hill this afternoon, House Judiciary Ranking Member Jamie Raskin talked about the committee.
The president and the MAGA followers cannot stop returning to the scene of their crime. They already attempted a rewrite in the House Administration Committee in the last Congress when Mr. Loudermilk led an attempted Orwellian rewrite of what took place on January 6th, 2021. The fact of the matter is they have not laid a glove on a single fact that was presented in the report of the bipartisan select committee on January 6th. All of their bizarre counter theories about Antifa and about the FBI have been completely and thoroughly debunked. They have gotten nowhere, and yet they insist once again on returning to the scene of the crime. That gives us the chance to educate new generations of Americans about the dangers of political authoritarianism and about the dangers of political and religious cults. We are also going to demand that this forum finally become a time of national reckoning with the fact that 140 of our police officers were wounded, injured, hospitalized, disfigured, and disabled by the savagery of Donald Trump's mob. Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump have done absolutely nothing for our police officers. They won't even put up the federally mandated plaque in Congress to honor the service of our officers and their sacrifice. Yet, Donald Trump pardoned nearly 1,600 insurrectionists and violent cop beaters, many of whom have already reoffended. And he calls them heroes. And he called them hostages, which is obscene. A hostage is someone who has been abducted and held for ransom by a terrorist or criminal group. That's what they think of the American judicial process.
House Judiciary Committee Ranking Member Jamie Raskin. Now, under the measure forming the panel that passed the House last week, Leader Jeffries is entitled to suggest 3 names to Speaker Mike Johnson, who holds the ultimate power to name its members. A spokesman for Speaker Johnson's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment, this from Politico, on whether the Speaker would approve Leader Jeffries' picks. And from Yahoo News, House Speaker Mike Johnson is walking back his statement that President Trump was an FBI informant against Jeffrey Epstein. He made those comments last week. A spokesperson from his office told The Independent, "The Speaker is reiterating what the victim's attorneys said, which is that Donald Trump, who kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, was the only one more than a decade ago willing to help prosecutors expose Epstein for being a disgusting child predator. Speaker Johnson said to reporters today that, quote, "I don't know if I used the right terminology," in his comments last week, adding, quote, "This is much ado about nothing." You're listening to Washington Today.
Coming up live Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN Radio, a task force on the declassification of federal secret subcommittee hearing on restoring public trust through unidentified anomalous phenomena transparency and whistleblower protection. Again, listen live at 10 a.m. Eastern Time here on C-SPAN Radio, and find all of C-SPAN Radio's schedule information on our website at cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today from the Los Angeles Times. California Attorney General Rob Bonta condemned today's Supreme Court decision that clears the way for immigration agents to stop and question people they suspect of being in the U.S. illegally, based solely on information such as their perceived race or place of employment.
We don't know the reason that the 6 judges decided on this. We may never know. But we do know, because he told us, Justice Kavanaugh's decision. And it's very disturbing. And I think Justice Sotomayor sort of captures where it leaves us if you follow Justice Kavanaugh's decision, again, which might not be the majority's rationale. And she says we ought not live in a government or in a nation where the government can seize you because you appear Latino, because you speak Spanish, or because you appear to have a low-wage job. And I couldn't agree more. We shouldn't live in a country like that. And that's what the lower court's decision was about, making sure that we don't live in a country like that. And we'll see what happens next. This is, an emergency petition. The U.S. Supreme Court could have stayed out of it and allowed the lower court proceedings to continue, but they decided that they wanted to weigh in. I'll also acknowledge that the U.S. Supreme Court has recently said that you can't consider race in college admissions when it could be one factor among many to tackle historical discrimination, to address personal racial discrimination in an applicant's life. You can't consider it. But you can consider race when in a city like LA, where there are so many Latino Californians lawfully present, following the law, you can use race as a factor to discriminate potentially against Angelenos and Californians based on race. So how they prevent the use of race to tackle discrimination but allow the use of race to potentially discriminate is disturbing, and it is troubling.
The LA Times reporting that Attorney General Bonta said he agreed with claims the American Civil Liberties Union made in its lawsuit against the Trump administration. He called indiscriminate tactics used to make immigration arrests a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. That's from the LA Times. Here's more from Attorney General Bonta.
Were you surprised by that or not?
Surprise these days is pretty relative. Disappointed. I think the rationale articulated by Justice Kavanaugh is dangerous and wrong, but he's a Supreme Court justice and I'm not. And I don't know if he represents the majority of the court on this issue, but he really went out of his way and wanted to make sure people knew his thinking, and so we know it, and it's dangerous. And obviously, as I've said before, I continue to have a strong belief in and a commitment to the rule of law. It's non-negotiable for me and for us here at the California DOJ. We'll uplift it and defend it. We follow court orders, and this wouldn't be the first time that in a case that we had or any party had, you've won below at the trial level, you've won at the intermediate appellate level, and maybe you don't get the answer that you want at the Supreme Court level. But we follow court orders because the appropriate thing to do in the United States of America. We're not talking about impeaching any justices or calling anyone a so-called judge or questioning the court's ability to opine. It is their role. They have taken a role. We will respect it. But it's disappointing. I wouldn't say surprised, but I will certainly say disappointed.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett is speaking out in her first interview since joining the court 5 years ago. She spoke with CBS News' Norah O'Donnell, and she defended one of the Supreme Court's most consequential decisions.
I want to read something just from the minority dissent on the court for Dobbs about what essentially the effect of overturning Roe versus Wade would be. And that dissent was signed by Justices Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor. They wrote, "The court may now face questions about the application of abortion regulations to medical care most people view as quite different from abortion. What about the morning after pill, IUDs, in vitro fertilization, and how about the use of dilation and evacuation of medication for miscarriage management?" Do you see those as issues that are coming about now as a result of Dobbs?
Let's see, those are issues inherent in medical practice, and sure, they surround pregnancy care and the care of women. And those are issues that are left now to the democratic process, and the states are working those out. We have not had those cases on our docket. But you know, the central message of Dobbs did not render abortion illegal. Dobbs did not say anything about whether abortion is immoral. Dobbs said that these are questions that are left to the states. All of these kinds of questions, decisions that you mentioned that require medical judgments, are not ones that the Constitution commits to the court, you know, to decide how far into pregnancy the right of abortion might extend. You know, the court was in the business of drawing a lot of those lines before, and what Dobbs says is that those calls are properly left to the democratic process, and the states have been working those out. There's been a lot of legislative activity and a lot of state constitutional activity since the decision in Dobbs was rendered.
Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett speaking to CBS News. Justice Barrett has a new book. It's called Listening to the Law, Reflections on the Court and Constitution. And she talked about the book and her life on the court at the National Book Festival here in D.C. this past weekend. We covered the festival live on Book TV on C-SPAN 2 on Saturday, and you can see her discussion with David Rubenstein at booktv.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. And from WUSA9.com here in D.C., law enforcement officials yesterday took down a peace vigil that had stood outside the White House for more than 4 decades after President Trump ordered it to be removed as part of the clearing of homeless encampments in the nation's capital. Filipos Malaku Bello is a volunteer who has manned the vigil for years in Lafayette Park, just across the street from the White House. He told the Associated Press that U.S. Park Police justified the removal by calling it a shelter. The White House confirmed the removal, telling AP in a statement that the vigil was, quote, a hazard to those visiting the White House and the surrounding areas. Filipos Malaku Bello is a volunteer who has manned the vigil for years. He watched officers take down the structures that covered the vigil, but he told WUSA that the vigil's message won't be removed so easily.
The vigil itself didn't come down because the signs are also the vigil, and the signs are even more important than only a tarp and PVC.
I understand that, but to see them come in and take that down, I can imagine that kind of hurt a little bit, given the history.
Well, of course it hurts, but you know what? I'm not going to dwell on the hurt. If other people want me to dwell on the hurt, I'm going to dwell on the power.
Now, the vigil's goal is to promote nuclear disarmament and to end global conflict. It was first set up in 1981. It's believed to be the longest continuous anti-war protest in U.S. history. Now, 2 years ago, we talked to Filipos Malaku Bello about the protest.
How are you allowed to be here 24 hours a day?
Well, there's a little document that people should know about, and it's called the Constitution of the United States of America. And everybody that's ever been in Congress, and everybody that's ever sat across the street in the White House, and just to my right, to your left, in the Eisenhower Executive Building, and before the Eisenhower Executive Building, the Vice President of the United States and Secretary of State have all sworn to defend the Constitution and the people of the United States of America from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then I say that many that took that vow failed dramatically in keeping the vow.
How long has this vigil been right here if people come to Lafayette Park and want to visit the White House from outside?
Okay, so it was on the White House side of the street until 1984. After 84, it was on this side of the street. William Thomas Hallenbeck, my godfather, he's the one that started the vigil, and he started with picket signs. 2 messages, one in one hand, front and back, one in the other hand, front and back. So there's 4 total messages. Wanted wisdom and honesty, no nukes now, human rights violations are an affront to humankind, and then the symbol for the nuclear device.
So how much time do you personally spend here, and what are the rules that your permit has to tell you how long you can stay here?
Well, we can stay here because part of it is that Ronald Reagan forgot to put an end date on the permit. But it's been challenged in court. There's presidents that thought that there should be no protesting in front of any federal property, meaning throughout the United States. But he was defeated easily because the First Amendment says that we have the right to freedom of speech, expression. It says that we have right to the lawful gathering of the people and the right to petition our government for a redress of grievances. That's government. I'm petitioning them with redress of grievances. Simply in modern English, not in 1780s English, to come out and speak out about the government. We're not running down the street. We're not breaking windows of businesses that have nothing to do with what we're protesting about. We are not putting any cars on fire that are not owned or have nothing to do with what we're protesting about. We are doing it, as the Constitution said, we're using our freedom of speech and expression to follow the First Amendment.
Filipos Malacubello talking to Book Notes Plus host Brian Lamb back in May of 2023 about his peace vigil outside the White House. You can hear that entire episode of Book Notes Plus at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And beginning this fall, all 3 C-SPAN networks will be available on YouTube TV and Hulu Plus Live TV. C-SPAN's availability on these streaming platforms expands access to our network's trusted, unfiltered coverage of the U.S. government. We'll update you on the launch date soon, but thank you for watching and listening wherever you follow C-SPAN. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy. From Washington and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, Max Cohen of Punchbowl News discusses the latest developments as Congress works to avoid a government shutdown and efforts to release additional files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Then New Jersey Democratic Representative Frank Pallone talks about Trump administration health care policy, government spending deadlines, and congressional news of the day. And the Conservative Partnership Institute's Rachel Bovard analyzes the state of the conservative movement in the U.S. and President Trump's second term so far. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.